I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Well, welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and what a delight to have with us today in the studio Dr. Tony Kriz. And we've had him on before, but it's been a while. And today we're going to talk to him about his latest book called ALOOF. He's a professor, he's an educator, he is a writer. And there's a picture of the book on the screen. You can check it out at the bookstores put out by Thomas Nelson. Look for it at Evangel or at Christian Discount Books or Amazon or Barnes & Noble. You're going to want to get it. How you doing, man? Good to see you.
Good. Good to see you.
You've been preaching. You were preaching at Patrick Doyle's church, which should have been an experience.
It was fantastic.
Good for you. Hey, a lot to talk to you about. But first of all, the book. What are you doing with this one? Because the Neighbors and Wiseman was fantastic.
Yeah.
What's this one?
Yeah. So this is I try and write on topics that I feel like aren't getting addressed well, particularly in the religious world. And this book is a discussion of God's hiddenness. What do we do with the fact that God hides? How do we process that concept? And it's, I think the reality is religion seems to promise that God will show up in these super tangible, visceral ways. Yeah. Worship leaders stand on stage and they say, God is speaking to me, God is near me, God is touching me. And I think most people sit in the pew and they never have those experiences, and they feel maybe that there's something wrong with them, maybe that they're broken or something. And pastors come to the podium and they say, God spoke to me this week and told me to tell you blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And the person in the audience goes, God has never spoken to me. How do I process that? And so I wanted to write a book about how do we process our life if God isn't particularly tangible all the time, or if we do have long spaces of silence where it doesn't seem like God is as close as religion talks about.
And you've never experienced that.
No, I've experienced that a lot, yeah. And so there's a hope to kind of process that. And there's, in the book, in the first chapter, actually, my 4-year-old nephew contracted cancer, a really despicable form of cancer. And that sort of was the thing that stimulated the writing, was my family trying to process pain and where's God right now. That was sort of the beginning. It's not a book about loss specifically, but that was the thing that started the conversation. And I know a lot of people understand loss and pain. We all do.
You've been very active in addressing the culture as well.
Yeah.
It's very much a part of who you are, what you do. And this is such a vast topic. We spent a lot of time here at the Dove trying to figure out the generational shifts that have happened.
Yeah.
We've gone through. We look at that a lot. But there is great concern today, is the church chasing the culture in order to win it, to convert it?
Yeah.
And if so, what's falling through the cracks?
Yeah, it's, I mean, that's a huge topic, Perry. I mean, to throw that out there, how many hours do we have? Yeah. Because on some level, we are called to chase the culture. On some level, we are called to be Jew to Jews and Greek to Greeks, as Paul talked about. We are called to incarnate ourselves on a very particular level. I would argue on a neighborhood level, to particularize our faith and our practice with Jesus. But on the other hand, to your concern, I feel like so often we are trying to compete with the culture in areas that practically we just can't win, but eternally, theologically, we're not called to compete in those ways. So we try and compete by having flashier meetings and bigger personalities and better technology. And these are all things where we're going to be beat by the culture every day. We're going to be beat by cable TV. We're going to be beat by YouTube. We're going to be beat by our concerts that people go to. There's no way we can do a better show than the culture. But there are things that the culture cannot do. The culture cannot offer people prayer. The culture can't offer people silence. We live in a world that is 15 minutes old. Yeah. Most of my generation, they don't even have a relationship with their grandparents, let alone anything that's older than a week in their life. And yet, faith can offer them 5,000 years of history, of sacred processes where they get to step into humanity across time and space and join them at the table of communion, for instance. There are so many things that we can offer our neighbors that the culture absolutely can't compete on, and I wonder why we don't focus on those things more.
So why do we seem to be chasing it the way we are? I mean, you make a great point, because most of our research shows that the church is at least 6 months, if not 18 months behind the various trends.
Right.
And I don't understand what we're trying to do.
I don't understand either. You know, like right now in our culture, one of the biggest issues is race and racial reconciliation.
Right, yeah.
This is a topic that has been at the center of the church's work since at least the time of Jesus, if not before. And yet, I feel like we've given up that topic to be argued within the secular world, where we should really be at the center. In ALOOF, there's a chapter called God is Black, which is how my family submitting ourselves to African Americans has helped me hear God's voice in a way I could never hear it before. There's another chapter called the One Behind Everything, which is how my Cherokee mentor has taught me about God and following Jesus in a way that I never could have learned. That by coming into these mutually submitted relationships across racial lines, that there's this profoundness that happens. And why aren't we in these conversations more as the people of God?
Why aren't we?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's because maybe part of it is we're losing market share. And how are we going to pay our bills becomes the driving question. How are we going to fill our pews becomes the driving question so often, as opposed to what is God really inviting us to say and do.
It's been said that we've done a great job in evangelism. We get a D- in discipleship. We're more interested in filling the house than we are training the person. Do you think that's true?
Another big topic, another huge topic. As part of me wants to, I want to conflate evangelism and discipleship more than we ever have before. I think we need to be inviting people who have been going to church for years back into the beauty of the gospel like they never have before. I think into conversion, almost on a daily level than ever before. But certainly, are we presenting, back to our earlier conversation, are we presenting a profound vision, profound prophetic vision of the life of God's people as we invite the whole world into that same vision as well? Are we presenting that? I don't know that we are.
You know, because it's so interesting, you can flip across the dial and you'll see incredible mega churches with huge crowds. And I'm not against mega churches, just if you start looking at this, Christianity is alive and well in America, but we're not changing the culture. We haven't addressed the race issue. I interviewed Bishop T.D. Jakes the other day, and he has now come to the conclusion with some other black bishops in his congregation and elsewhere that it's time to come out of the church and go in and start doing the reconciling. So he seems to feel like we need to go back in and begin to reconcile. We're not talking about the black race and the red race, the brown race. We're talking about the human race. You know, he's seeing that. But, you know, Tony, we don't seem to be changing things.
Nope.
And I don't know if it's because we've been allowed ourselves to be politicized. Is that it? I mean, I mean, we've been called to be the thermostat, not the thermometer, but we're not setting the culture's temperature.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly in one hand, we're not. In another hand, I think we don't even realize the work of God around us, and that there really are ways that we are increasingly getting involved in these things. I think Bishop Jakes is a great example of someone who is increasingly stepping in and helping set the tone. And I've been spending some time with Christian leaders across the country on the question of race specifically, and in Ferguson and in different realms where there's really been a tinderbox. And I think that there is hope there. And I think this new civil rights movement is very much saturated with people of faith. And so I'm in many levels encouraged.
The one in South Carolina, they handled it extremely well. Yeah. I mean, they depoliticized it before it ever really hit the press, which was wonderful. You know?
And that was a lot of pastors, a lot of Christian leaders at the center of all of that.
Do you think race is a topic that pastors would preach on?
Well, it's a huge challenge. You and I, two, middle-class white guys sitting here having the conversation. It's very difficult as a majority culture to step up and speak with authority on a question of race because, quite frankly, we don't know what the heck we're talking about.
Right.
And one of the things I would want to call the church to is an opening of our pulpits to non-white people, to actually be the ones, to even submitting ourselves, our congregations, to non-white folk to come and be our leaders, to be our elders around these issues. So that's part of the challenge is when white people speak on these things, there's a level of ignorance, there's a level that we just cannot understand.
Right.
And secondarily, just practically, it's easy to dismiss a white voice, and rightfully so.
Yeah. All right. Let me take a quick break. We'll be back with Tony. He's the author, his latest book, here it is. You may want to check it out. It's called ALOOF. And I want to get a little deeper in the book when we come back. We'll be right back with Tony Kriz in just a minute. Okay, we're back with Tony Kriz, and he's authored some books, and he lectures. He's a professor, and he has his PhD in, let's see here, ministry.
Spiritual formation.
Spiritual formation. So what was your thesis?
My thesis was called Anglican Eucharistic Liturgy, a Church Planting Hope for the Post-Christian Culture of the Pacific Northwest. That was the title.
That was your thesis.
No,
Really?
but the topic was on how, we talked about this a little bit earlier, on how many of the historical church forms, I think, are going to have a strong missional place in the future of post-Christendom in North America. And so I was talking about how things like liturgy and communion, sacraments, that these things are going to become incredibly missional because people don't get sacredness anywhere else in their life. And the church can offer sacredness to non-churched, even non-religious people.
Oh, you opened up another can of worms.
I know, I do
of,
that.
Holiness and sacredness. Let me just jump ahead a little bit. What do you think the message of the American church is today?
What do I think the message of the American church is today?
Yeah, I mean, if people were just saying, I'm going to give this faith thing a look at, what do you think they're going to get in the way of a message?
I think what people hear is either just a tribalism, so all they hear is static, a tribalism that the church is only really talking for itself, and so it doesn't apply to me, so therefore I just hear static when it comes to the church. Or I think people hear a power agenda, where the church used to be the big dog on the block, and it's not anymore. And again, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I live in a post-Christian context. This may not be true across the whole nation, right, but where the church is sort of now this wounded, weak animal that's trying to hold on to power that it once felt like it had and it doesn't have anymore. So what do they see? They see what happens on Fox News. They see what happens in the political sphere. But they don't see much of anything else.
Sacredness.
Yeah.
What concerns me is that and I want to say this respectfully, but if we're not careful, we make Jesus a dude.
Right.
And what slips through the cracks is the holiness and the sacredness and the righteousness of God. I mean, we just don't sense it and see it. We turn some of our worship services into a nightclub.
I wouldn't disagree with you. Now, that's easy for me to say because my spiritual temperament, just the way God made me, I would rather meditate than jump up and down. I like silence, and I like candles. I like liturgy. I like written prayers as opposed to spontaneous, cool-sounding prayers. That's the way that I'm wired. So it's easy for me to critique it, but there's some truth to that. And Jesus is incredibly beautiful. But also, what's the line in C.S. Lewis's, is he safe? No, he's not safe, but he's good. And I think we treat Jesus as if Jesus is safe. And
we've merchandised him into something else.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the line is all that. I don't want to be critical either, but from what I'm sensing is that there's a real hunger for an authentic relationship with God. And everybody's trying to describe what that may be. But what seems to fall through the cracks is a reverence or a holiness.
Yeah.
And I don't mean legalism.
Right.
But I mean, you know, a genuine reverence and holiness.
Yeah. Another piece along the way is because of the triumphalism in the language of religious leaders, the illusion that the person up front has it all figured out, or that their life with God is just full of joy and hope and peace and purpose at all times, that comes off as shallow and trite, because it's just not true. It's just not true. And most people don't experience a triumphal life with God. They experience a very real life with God, and God wants to step into our sorrow. God wants to step into our pain and the silence so much. I mean, part of the reason I wrote ALOOF was to try and go, if you feel like your life with God is not triumphalistic all the time, you are not alone. In fact, most of the characters of the Bible do not have triumphalistic relationships with God. They have plodding, silent, often tortured relationships with God. Mother Teresa said she never once had an encounter with God in her entire life. You are not alone. If you are desperately trying to hold on to God and don't necessarily feel the warm, fuzzy feedback that that religion has promised you're supposed to get, you are not alone. You are in good company. Now then, how should we live? That's the question.
Yeah, because one of the questions that pops up, why would God put all these promises in the book and then be quiet about them?
Or are those promises really there the way we frame them?
That's a great question.
I think so often we pick and choose the passages that most line up with our we've got it all figured out, look how great we are, just come and you'll get your spiritual fix if you come to our church. And then we pick and choose those passages as opposed to the long sections of silence, for instance, with the long sections of loss that happen throughout the Bible. It's interesting that even in the book of Acts, it's only through just over the first half of the book of Acts, God shows up in almost every chapter in some way, speaks to somebody directly, does a direct healing or miracle. The last half of the book of Acts, God doesn't show up hardly at all, indirectly. Certainly God is totally involved. But the book of Acts, which is supposed to be the book of miracles, the book of the early church, the last half, God is fairly silent. And I've never heard a pastor say that from the podium ever in my life.
So you're saying this in the book, and you make a great point, and that is what's being taught from the pulpit about, well, I shouldn't say taught, but at least expressed from the pulpit. God spoke to me, and I'm having a tough day, and I haven't heard God's voice, and I can't remember when, if at all, so I must be inferior.
That's it. Is there something broken inside of me? I think it's the question a lot of people are scared to ask. The question exists. They're scared to bring it to the surface because they'll be invalidated by their religious community. So what they do is they stuff the question, is there something just wrong with me? Am I just not fitting into God's agenda? And then they spend their whole life pretending, going through the behaviors of religion and God showing up as they go about church and walk the foyer.
So what do you want them to get from this?
I want them to stop pretending. I think it's pandemic.
Really? I can't disagree with you, so how would you walk somebody out of this?
Well, it has to happen within community. It has to happen within relationship. The hope is in writing a book like ALOOF, where I get pretty honest, even visceral, in my feelings, my emotions, my failures, my doubts, to go, I'm attempting to start the conversation. I'm attempting to sort of put some vocabulary on the table, and hopefully others will pick it up and go, I'm gonna risk to talk about this other end of the spectrum. I'm not saying that the beautiful, pleasant end of the spectrum does not exist with God. It absolutely does, but often we ignore this whole other side. And how can we possibly live a full spiritual life if we're not embracing both ends? So I want to just help people begin to have that conversation with their friends, in their household, in their small groups, and hopefully it'll make it to the pulpit.
ALOOF. Get a copy of it. ALOOF. By the way, Tony Kriz, KRIZ.com is his website. Check it out. You wrote this from experience.
Oh yeah, it's all stories. If you like stories, you'll love this book.
You ever feel like God's abandoned you?
Yeah. Yep.
How'd you get through it?
Well, not easy. Again, I think often one of our problems is in some religious spheres, not all, we want to propagate this quick fix culture. That if you just do this formula, say this prayer, do these 3 steps, everything will be great. And it's completely inconsistent with both biblical history and church history. My seasons of great pain, great loss, have been years often in the desert, to use a metaphor, years of longing and loss. I was overseas. We talked about this last time I was on the show. I was overseas for 8 years, working in some difficult points around the world, and my particular false beliefs about what makes me valid, what makes me good, what it'll take for God to like me and accept me, were based in lies. They were based in my performance, and that led to massive burnout and a really embarrassing failure overseas, being fired publicly, shamefully. But a year before that firing happened, I was in desperate pain around my faith and spirituality. I get into that quite a bit in ALOOF. And there was a year of being a missionary leader with a dead soul, being publicly fired, and then a year and a half after of just hurt and loss and feeling like my heart was dead and could never recover and that God had abandoned me. Not true. But that's what it felt like. And here's the reality, Perry, that I'm convinced of. I am not the most important character in my own spiritual story. God is the most important character. God is more emotionally committed to my spiritual story than I am. And God was with me. Silently, yes, but was with me. And those experiences were a great mercy, a severe mercy in my life.
Have you ever heard the voice of God?
I have.
And
a couple of times in 44 years.
Okay, so you know it can happen.
It can happen.
Did it catch you by surprise?
Yes.
Both times?
Both times.
Okay, and that's usually, every time I ask that question, that's what I usually hear. It was when you weren't expecting it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, because I'm not the most important character. If I was the most important character, I would be able to conjure that experience when I want it. Yet if God's the most important character, God's taking the lead.
Good stuff. Tony Kriz, get this book, ALOOF. I think you'll find it to be pretty solid stuff for you to have in your life. Because I think we all go through those times where God's real quiet. And this will help you through that. TonyKriz.com is his website, and be looking for some of his videos on theDove TV. We're going to work something out and get him on there. Off the Highway, which is the little vignettes you'll see here on theDove TV. Thank you, brother. I think you need to be doing a show on theDove TV network. I think you're touching a lot of great spots and nerves here this morning, so thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.